Sarah Chen had been driving the back roads of Millbrook, North Carolina for 43 years. The small town sat about 60 miles from Fort Liberty, and most of the community knew each other by their family names, their church attendance, or their military service. Sarah knew it differently. She knew Millbrook as the place that had never quite believed in her. It was early Tuesday morning when Sarah received the phone call. She was sitting in the kitchen of her modest two-story home on Hickory Street, the same house where she'd lived for the past 20 years. Her coffee was still steaming in a ceramic mug with a faded American flag painted on the side. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone to her ear, listening to the voice on the other end confirm what she'd only dreamed about. "Congratulations, Colonel Chen," the voice said. It was General Hayes from Pentagon personnel. "Your promotion to Brigadier General has been approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and confirmed by the Secretary of Defense. You'll be heading the newly established Joint Operations Training Command at Fort Liberty. You'll officially pin on your star in a ceremony next month." Sarah set down her coffee cup. The slight clink of ceramic on wood seemed to echo through the quiet kitchen. She pressed her eyes closed and took a deep breath. For 38 years, she had served her country. She had started as an 18-year-old recruit with nothing but determination and a burning need to prove something to everyone around her. Now, at 56 years old, she would finally wear a general's star. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion rising in her throat. "I won't let you down." After the call ended, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen for nearly an hour. She didn't call anyone. She didn't text her sister or email her closest friends. She simply sat with the news, letting it settle into her bones like she was absorbing this new reality through sheer force of will. The reason for her silence was complicated. Sarah had learned long ago that sharing good news in Millbrook often meant watching it get smaller in the retelling. It meant people patting her on the shoulder with half smiles and congratulations that didn't quite reach their eyes. It meant the men at the hardware store continuing to call her sweetheart when she came in to buy supplies. It meant her neighbors still treating her like she was the girl who'd moved to town with just a small car and big dreams. The people of Millbrook had watched Sarah grow up in their school system. They'd watched her graduate from Millbrook High School in 1985. They'd attended the same churches and shopped at the same stores. But what they hadn't learned to do was see her as the accomplished officer she had become. To them, she would always be the girl who wasn't quite good enough, not quite confident enough, not quite the right kind of soldier. That changed 3 weeks later when the local Millbrook Gazette ran a front-page article about her promotion. The headline read, "Local woman named General." The article was pleasant enough, but it contained the usual mix of surprise and condescension that Sarah had come to expect. The reporter had written, "Chen, who has spent most of her career in administrative roles, has somehow managed to climb the military hierarchy to achieve this rare honor." Somehow managed. The word sat in Sarah's stomach like a stone. Sarah had not spent most of her career in administrative roles. She had been a combat operations officer. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She had developed training protocols that were now used across 5 military branches. She had logged over 8,000 hours of flight operations and held a master's degree in military strategy from Georgetown University. She had survived a roadside bombing in 2009 that had left her with a piece of shrapnel permanently lodged near her spine. But the Millbrook Gazette had reduced her career to somehow managed. 2 days after the article ran, Sarah was at the grocery store. It was a Thursday afternoon, and she was picking up fresh vegetables for dinner. She'd pushed her cart to the produce section when she heard a familiar voice call out her name. Sarah Chen." She turned to see Martha Wickham, a woman she'd gone to high school with, waving enthusiastically. Martha was a real estate agent in town. They'd never been close friends, but they ran in some of the same circles at community events. Martha hurried over, her face bright with what looked like genuine happiness. "I saw the article," Martha said, pulling Sarah into a quick hug. "That's so wonderful for you, a general, can you believe it?" Sarah smiled, and it wasn't entirely forced. Martha's warmth seemed real. "Thank you, it's been a long journey." "I bet," Martha said, glancing around to see if anyone else was nearby. "You know, when we were in high school, I don't think anyone would have predicted this for you. I mean, you were so quiet, so careful. I always figured you'd do something like teaching or maybe nursing. But here you are, a general. Life is surprising, isn't it?" Sarah felt the familiar sting of that comment, though Martha had delivered it with a smile. Quiet and careful, code for not assertive enough, not bold enough. Not officer material, and yet here she was. "I'm just grateful for the opportunity to serve," Sarah said, turning back to the vegetables. "Well, you should be proud," Martha said. "Not everyone gets where you've gotten. Not everyone has the ability, you know." Sarah selected a tomato and placed it carefully in her cart, not trusting herself to respond to that particular comment. Later that week, Sarah drove to Fort Liberty for a routine briefing. The base was 40 minutes south of Millbrook, a sprawling military installation that covered thousands of acres. She'd made this drive hundreds of times during her career, but this time felt different. This time, she was driving toward a new chapter of her life. The briefing was scheduled with her soon-to-be superior officer, Major General Donald Bradford. Bradford had a reputation as a good commander, steady, fair, and demanding. He'd been in the military for 42 years and had seen just about everything. Sarah respected his service record and was genuinely looking forward to working under his command. She found his office on the second floor of the administrative building. His assistant, a young lieutenant, welcomed her warmly and ushered her in immediately. Bradford stood up from behind his desk as she entered. He was a tall man with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had earned his position through years of hard work. He extended his hand, and his handshake was firm and quick. "Brigadier General Chen," he said, "welcome, please sit down." They spent the next hour discussing her new role, the responsibilities that came with it, and the team she'd be leading. Bradford was impressed by her vision for the Joint Operations Training Command. He asked intelligent questions and seemed to genuinely listen to her answers. By the end of the meeting, Sarah felt something she didn't often feel. She felt seen. She felt like someone was actually looking at her accomplishments and her capabilities, not at what she wasn't. "You've built an impressive career," Bradford said as she was leaving. "Your record speaks for itself. Don't let anyone tell you that you didn't earn this." Sarah paused at the door. Those words hung in the air between them. The fact that he felt compelled to say them, that he understood instinctively that she might need to hear them, said something important about what her life had been like. It confirmed what she'd always suspected. There were people who understood and there were people who didn't. Bradford clearly understood. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for 4 weeks away. It would take place at Fort Liberty with about 200 military personnel in attendance. Sarah's family was invited. Her sister, Lisa, had already called to say she was taking time off work. Sarah's elderly mother, who still lived in a retirement community near Raleigh, was planning to attend. And then there were the logistics of telling people in Millbrook. Sarah decided to keep it relatively quiet. She mentioned it to her pastor. She told her 2 closest neighbors. She posted it on her personal Facebook page without commentary, just a simple, "Looking forward to the ceremony next month. Grateful for my family's support. Marcus Webb had moved to Millbrook 3 years earlier." He was a Marine Corps officer who'd retired from active duty at the rank of captain after 24 years of service. He'd settled in Millbrook because his ex-wife's family lived in the area, and it gave him proximity to his 2 teenage kids. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with the kind of confidence that came from decades of military service. He'd carved out a life for himself running a small cafe called Webb's Place downtown, and he was well-liked in town. Sarah had met him a few times at community events. He was always friendly, always charming. She'd never gotten any sense that he viewed her differently than anyone else in Millbrook did, which is to say, as a nice lady who worked in the military but would probably never be anything too special. Then, 3 days before her promotion ceremony, she ran into him at the bank. She was making a deposit, standing in line to speak with a teller when Marcus walked through the door. He spotted her immediately and waved. Sarah waved back. He came over and stood beside her. "Sarah, just the person I wanted to see," he said, his tone pleasant. "I heard about your big promotion, General, right? That's incredible." "Thank you," Sarah said, a bit surprised by his attention. "It's been a long time coming." Marcus grinned, and in that grin, Sarah saw something shift. This wasn't the friendly greeting of a peer. This was something else. This was condescension dressed up in a smile. "So tell me," Marcus said, leaning in slightly, his voice just loud enough for a few other people in the bank to hear. "What's your actual rank? Like, for real? Because I know the military has all these ways of bumping people up and making sure everyone feels special these days. So what would you have been if you joined 20 years later?" The question hung in the air. Sarah could feel her heart rate pick up. There was something deliberately disrespectful in the way he'd asked it. He was questioning her legitimacy, her actual qualifications, right there in the bank in front of other people. "My rank is Brigadier General," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "That's 1 star, same as any other Brigadier General in the military." Right, Marcus said, nodding thoughtfully, though his expression suggested he wasn't convinced. "But you know what I mean. In my day, you had to really prove yourself to make general. Things were different back then." "I'm sure they were," Sarah said. She was grateful that the teller called her forward at that moment. She stepped up to the counter, her hands gripping her deposit envelope a bit tighter than necessary. As she was making her deposit, she could feel Marcus watching her from across the bank. She didn't look back at him. She kept her focus on the teller, on the transaction, on maintaining her composure. But the damage was done. Marcus had planted a seed of doubt in a public place. Not a serious seed, Sarah knew her own qualifications, but a seed nonetheless. And in a small town, seeds like that grew quickly. She heard about it the next day from her neighbor, Patricia. Patricia mentioned, in what she thought was a casual way, that she'd heard Marcus asking questions about whether Sarah's promotion was earned or just given out. Patricia meant well. She was trying to warn Sarah, trying to give her a heads up. But what her warning really did was confirm that the story was spreading. Sarah tried not to let it bother her. She was a general now. She had more important things to worry about than the opinions of a retired Marine captain who ran a cafe in a small town. She repeated this to herself multiple times, and yet she felt the sting of it. She felt the unfairness of someone questioning her achievements based on nothing but his own biases. The evening before her ceremony, Sarah sat in her house and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing her dress uniform, the formal blues that she would wear during the official pinning ceremony. The uniform fit perfectly, tailored to her body after years of wearing military dress. She looked at her face in the mirror and tried to see what Marcus Webb saw. She tried to understand how a man could look at 38 years of military service and somehow conclude that it wasn't real. The answer, she knew, was simple. Marcus didn't believe that someone like her, a quiet woman from a small town, could accomplish something that exceptional. It didn't fit his narrative of how the world worked. So rather than adjust his narrative, he tried to make her achievements smaller. The next morning, Sarah drove to Fort Liberty. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock. The weather was beautiful, October, with a cool breeze and clear blue skies. It was the kind of day that felt ceremonial, like the universe had decided to mark the occasion. Her sister Lisa was already there when she arrived, looking beautiful in a dark dress suit. Her mother had traveled the day before and was being helped to her seat in the front row by a young officer. Sarah hugged both of them, feeling the weight of their love and pride. The ceremony began promptly at 10. Sarah stood in the formation with other officers, watching as the promotion board was called to order. There were several other officers being promoted that day, but Sarah was the star of the show. She was the highest rank being promoted, and she was one of only a handful of women in the room. When her name was called, she stepped forward. Major General Bradford was conducting the ceremony. He called her to the center of the formation and began reading her citation, detailing her service, her accomplishments, and her qualifications. As he read, Sarah felt something shift inside her. All of it was true, every word. Her service wasn't earned through favoritism or luck or some misguided attempt by the military to be inclusive. She had earned it through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication. "It is therefore my honor," Bradford said, "to present Colonel Sarah Chen for promotion to the rank of Brigadier General." Her sister pinned the star on her uniform. There was a moment of applause, and then Bradford shook her hand, and she was a general. Officially, formally, and forever. The office was located in her new headquarters at Fort Liberty, a suite of rooms on the 4th floor of the main administrative building. Sarah had been working there for nearly every day since her ceremony, settling into her new role, meeting her team, and beginning to implement the vision for the Joint Operations Training Command that she'd presented to Major General Bradford. Her assistant, Lieutenant Jennifer Park, knocked on her office door around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jennifer looked nervous, which was unusual for her. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, "there's someone here to see you, a civilian. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. His name is David Chen." Sarah looked up from her desk. David Chen was her nephew, her sister Lisa's oldest son. He was 26 years old and worked as an investigative journalist for a digital news outlet called Carolina Truth. He was smart, principled, and brave, qualities that Sarah admired but also worried about in his line of work. "Send him in," Sarah said, though she was already feeling a flutter of concern. David came in looking somewhat harried. He was wearing a blazer and jeans, and he had the energy of someone who'd been on a story and hadn't stopped to rest. He hugged Sarah quickly and then sat down across from her desk. "Hi, Aunt Sarah," he said. "I'm sorry to show up without calling. I'm working on something and I need to ask you some questions. I need your help." "Of course," Sarah said. "What's going on?" David pulled out his phone and opened a voice recording application. "Is it okay if I record this for my own notes?" Sarah nodded, though she felt a deeper sense of concern now. David wouldn't come here for personal family chat. This was journalist David, not nephew David. "About 2 weeks ago, I received an interesting email from someone who works in military personnel," David said. "They didn't identify themselves, but they sent me a document. It was about the promotion board that approved your promotion to Brigadier General." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Okay." "The email suggested that there had been an issue with the board's decision," David continued. "Specifically, that there had been a member of the board who argued against your promotion based on gender bias. Not directly, of course. These things are never that obvious. But this person apparently made comments during the closed-door board session that he felt you were being promoted primarily because the military was trying to increase the percentage of female general officers." Sarah's hands felt cold. She clasped them together on her desk. "Did the board end up recommending my promotion despite this?" "That's the thing," David said. "The board voted unanimously to recommend you. This one officer's comments didn't carry any weight. But what concerns me is that someone inside the military thought the military leadership needed to know about this bias. That's why they sent me the document. They wanted it on record that there was someone in the system trying to diminish your accomplishment." "Do you have the name of the officer who made these comments?" Sarah asked quietly. David scrolled through his phone. "Yes, Brigadier General Walter Thompson. He's based at Fort Bragg. He's been in the military for 41 years and is set to retire next year." Sarah knew Walter Thompson. She had served with him years ago in a joint operations capacity. She'd never had a strong opinion of him one way or the other. But now, knowing what he'd said, she felt a sharp sense of betrayal and anger. "I'm planning to write a story about this," David said. "About bias in the military promotion system with your promotion as a case study. I wanted to talk to you first before I file it. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with me going forward." Sarah looked at her nephew. He was earnest, and he wanted to do the right thing. But she also knew what it would mean to have this story go public. It would resurrect all the questions that Marcus Webb had planted. It would suggest that her promotion had been contentious. It would give ammunition to everyone who'd ever doubted her. "I need to think about it," Sarah said. "Can you give me a few days?" "Of course," David said. "Take the time you need, but Aunt Sarah, you didn't do anything wrong here, and you shouldn't have to protect people who did try to do something wrong." After David left, Sarah sat in her office for a long time. She looked out the window at the base below, at the soldiers and officers walking across the grounds, going about their work. She thought about what it meant to be a woman in an institution that had been designed by men, for men. She thought about the fact that even at the very top levels of military leadership, there was still someone trying to diminish her accomplishments based solely on her gender. That evening, Sarah called Major General Bradford. She explained what David had found out. Bradford listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm not surprised," he said finally. "I've seen this before many times. It's one of the reasons we have these policies in the first place, to counteract the bias that still exists in some quarters. But the important thing is that you were selected based on your merits. That's what matters." "I know," Sarah said, "but I'm worried about what happens if David publishes this story. People in Millbrook already question whether I deserved this, if this comes out." "People in Millbrook are going to doubt you no matter what," Bradford said gently. "Because that's what people do when someone breaks the mold of their expectations. The only way to fight that doubt is with truth. Your truth is that you earned this. All of it. Every single star. And if David's story helps ensure that other women officers don't have to fight the same battles you did, then maybe that's something worth doing." Sarah thought about what Bradford had said for 3 days. She thought about it while she worked, while she drove home in the evenings, while she lay in bed at night. And finally, she called David and told him to go ahead with the story. David's article ran on a Thursday morning. It was published simultaneously on Carolina Truth's website and shared on social media. The headline read, "Bias Uncovered in Military Promotion Board, Female General's Achievement Questioned Based on Gender, Not Merit." The article was careful and well-researched. David had interviewed military ethics experts, military historians, and several former officers who were willing to go on record about gender bias in the promotion system. He quoted Brigadier General Thompson's specific comments, which had been included in the document sent to him by the anonymous military official. Thompson had said, "While Colonel Chen has an adequate service record, I believe this promotion is primarily being driven by the military's desire to increase female representation among general officers. I question whether she would have been promoted if she were a man with her same qualifications." The article then detailed Sarah's actual record: her 3 tour in Afghanistan, her combat medals, her advanced degree, her development of training protocols that were now used across 5 military branches. The article made it very clear that Sarah's promotion had been based on decades of achievement, not on gender-based favoritism. Within hours, the story went viral. It was picked up by major news outlets. CNN ran a segment on it. The New York Times published an analysis of gender bias in military promotions. Military leadership was forced to comment. The Secretary of Defense released a statement affirming that Sarah Chen's promotion was based on merit and accomplishment. And something interesting happened. Brigadier General Walter Thompson announced his retirement, effective immediately. He released a statement saying that he'd made comments during the promotion board process that he regretted and that he'd decided not to continue his service. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being a national story. Her phone rang constantly. Journalists wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted her to appear as a guest. Military leadership wanted to celebrate her as an example of female achievement in the armed forces. But the most unexpected response came from Millbrook. 3 days after the article was published, Sarah received a letter delivered to her home. It was from a group calling themselves Millbrook Concerned Citizens. The letter expressed support for Sarah and condemned the bias she had faced. It was signed by over 200 people, including the mayor, the principal of Millbrook High School, several local business owners, and many of her neighbors. Then came a phone call from Marcus Webb. Sarah almost didn't answer when she saw his name on her caller ID, but something made her pick up. "Brigadier General Chen," he said, and his tone was completely different from the last time they'd spoken. "I owe you an apology." Sarah said nothing, waiting to hear what he had to say. "I heard about the article," Marcus continued. "About what Thompson said during the board meeting. I realized that I was doing exactly what he was doing, questioning your accomplishment based on my own assumptions and biases. I was wrong. I'm sorry for what I said at the bank. It was disrespectful, and it was based on nothing but my own prejudices. You earned that star, and you deserve to wear it with pride." Sarah felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure if it was forgiveness or just a kind of weary acceptance that people could change, at least sometimes. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "That means something." After she hung up, Sarah sat on her couch and looked out at the street where she'd lived for 20 years. Millbrook had seen her now. It had finally, through the lens of a national news story, recognized her for what she actually was, a dedicated officer who had worked hard and earned her position. But the satisfaction of that recognition was complicated. It felt like it shouldn't have taken a scandal and a media frenzy for people to see what had been true all along. 6 months after David's article was published, Sarah was invited to speak at her alma mater, Millbrook High School. The occasion was Women's History Month. The school wanted her to talk to students about military service, about breaking barriers, and about persistence in the face of doubt. Sarah was hesitant at first. She'd never been much of a public speaker, and the idea of standing in front of a few hundred teenagers and discussing her life felt uncomfortable. But she decided to do it anyway. On the morning of the event, Sarah put on her dress uniform. She was proud of the star on her shoulder, more so now than she had been even at the ceremony. She knew what that star had cost her, not just in years of hard work, but in fighting the doubts and biases of people who couldn't quite believe that she deserved it. The auditorium was full. Students filled the seats and teachers lined the back walls. In the front row, Sarah could see her old high school principal, Mr. Henderson, who'd retired 5 years ago but came back for special events. She saw Martha Wickham, who'd run into her at the grocery store, sitting with a few other parents. She saw her sister Lisa, who'd taken the day off work to attend. The principal introduced Sarah with a lengthy list of her accomplishments. Then Sarah walked out onto the stage, and the students applauded. She stood at the podium and looked out at the faces in front of her. They were young, mostly 16 to 18 years old. Some of them looked interested. Some of them looked bored. Some of them were probably only in this auditorium because their teachers had made them come. "When I was your age," Sarah began, her voice steady, "I decided that I wanted to join the military. Nobody in my family had served. Nobody in my community could really tell me what that meant. But I knew that I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. I wanted to be part of something larger than myself." She told them about her first day at basic training. She told them about the difficulty of being a woman in a male-dominated institution. She told them about the times she'd been told she wasn't good enough, wasn't aggressive enough, wasn't the right kind of leader. She told them about the obstacle course that had seemed impossible her first time through. She told them about the supervisor who told her that women didn't belong in combat operations. She told them about all of it. But more importantly, she told them about the people who'd believed in her, the commanding officer who'd mentored her, the female sergeant who'd shown her that you could be both strong and compassionate, the man at the personnel office who'd helped her get into the advanced training program she'd been too intimidated to apply for. "The truth is," Sarah said, "I didn't get here alone. I had help. I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I had mentors who saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself yet. I had hard work and I had luck. I had the determination to keep going when people told me to stop. And I had something else that I think is really important." She paused and looked at the audience. "I had the knowledge that I was right about myself," she said. "Not in an arrogant way, but I had looked at my capabilities and I had looked at my effort and I had known that I belonged. And when people doubted me, I didn't let their doubt become my doubt. That's the thing I want you to take away from this. You're going to face doubt. People are going to question your capabilities. They're going to make assumptions about you based on how you look or where you come from or what they think people like you can do. But if you know that you're right about yourself, if you know that you've worked hard and that you deserve the opportunity, then you hold on to that. You don't let their doubt become your doubt." When she finished, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Several students came up afterward to talk to her. One young woman, a senior named Keisha, asked Sarah if she could write her a letter of recommendation for military academy applications. Sarah said yes immediately. After the event, Sarah spoke with some of the parents and teachers. Martha Wickham came up and hugged her. "I'm so proud of you," Martha said, and Sarah believed her. It seemed like Martha had finally really seen her, not as the quiet girl from high school, but as the accomplished officer and leader that Sarah had become. The principal, Mr. Henderson, pulled Sarah aside. "I remember you," he said. "You were always one of my favorite students. Quiet, but you had a kind of steady determination. I'm not even remotely surprised that you made it to general. I always thought you'd do something like that." Sarah looked at him carefully. She wasn't sure if he was being truthful or if he was retroactively revising his memory now that she was famous. It didn't really matter. Either way, it felt good to hear. That evening, Sarah sat in her kitchen and wrote letters to several people. She wrote to Major General Bradford and thanked him for his mentorship and support. She wrote to her sister and told her how grateful she was for her presence and her love. She wrote to David and commended him for his important work in uncovering bias in the military system. And then she wrote to herself, in the form of a letter to be opened on the day she retired from military service. "Dear General Chen," she wrote, "you have come so far, you have faced doubt and bias and the casual dismissal of people who never believed in you. You have carried on anyway. You have built something meaningful. You have served your country with honor and distinction. You have shown other women that it is possible to reach the very top of this institution, that we belong here, that we are not here by accident or favoritism, but because we earned it. Be proud of that. You have nothing to apologize for. Your star is yours." 6 months later, Sarah was assigned to a joint task force with Captain Marcus Webb's adult son, Daniel, who joined the Marine Corps just after his father retired. Daniel came to her office one afternoon to discuss operational logistics. As they were finishing their meeting, he said, "My dad wanted me to tell you that he respects what you've done, that he thinks you're a good example of someone who didn't let other people's doubts get in the way of what you knew was true about yourself. He said he wishes he'd figured that out sooner." Sarah smiled. Tell him I appreciate that, and tell him that I hope he passes that lesson on to you." On what would have been her 40-year mark, Sarah sat in Major General Bradford's office for the last time. She was retiring. She was 61 years old, and she decided that it was time to pass the torch to the next generation. "You're going to have a good retirement," Bradford said, handing her a retirement plaque that bore her rank and her name. "You've earned it, and more than that, you've changed this institution. You've shown that women belong at the highest levels of military leadership, not as a token or as a diversity hire, but as leaders who have worked and sacrificed and earned their position through decades of dedication. That's a legacy, General Chen. That's something real." Sarah took the plaque and held it carefully. She looked at her name engraved on it and thought about the girl from Millbrook who'd been told that she wasn't quite good enough, that she was too quiet, that she lacked the assertiveness to lead. That girl had become a general. That girl had changed the institution that tried to diminish her. That girl had proven that quiet determination and steady hard work could carry you further than people who doubted you ever dreamed possible. When Sarah returned to Millbrook for good, the town threw her a reception. It was held at the community center, and it seemed like everyone in town showed up to congratulate her. Even Marcus Webb, looking genuinely glad to see her succeed. Sarah stood in that room, surrounded by the people who'd known her and doubted her, and she felt something like peace. Not because they finally believed in her, though that was nice, but because she no longer needed them to believe in her in order to believe in herself. She was General Sarah Chen. She had served her country with honor for 40 years. She had broken barriers and fought bias. She had mentored the next generation of officers and worked to make the military a place where talent and dedication could rise, regardless of gender. In the years after her retirement, Sarah would mentor dozens of young officers, both men and women. She would write articles about her experiences and speak at military academies. She would work with the Secretary of Defense's Office on initiatives to combat bias in military promotion systems. The changes that resulted from her story would open doors for countless other women who'd been told they weren't good enough. But standing in that reception in Millbrook on a beautiful spring evening, what Sarah felt most of all was gratitude. Gratitude for the strength to keep going when people doubted her. Gratitude for the opportunities she'd been given. Gratitude for the chance to serve her country and make a difference. And yes, gratitude for living in a time where the truth could finally be told, where bias could be exposed, and where someone like her could reach the highest ranks and inspire others to do the same.